Expressions produce a value. They can be used where values are expected. If a function is placed where a browser expects to see an expression, such as an argument to a function, then it gets treated as an expression. A function declaration creates a function that you can call later in your code. It is this type of function that you have seen so far in the course. In order to call the function later in the code, you must give it a name, so these are known as named functions. This example right here illustrates a function called area. We're declaring the function right here, and then we can use the name area to call it at some later point in our code. The interpreter always looks for variables and function declarations before going through each section of a script line by line. This means that a function created with a function declaration can be called before it has ever been declared. This is an example of a function expression. If you put a function where the interpreter would expect to see an expression, then it's treated as an expression. This is known as a function expression. In function expressions, the name is usually omitted. A function with no name is called an anonymous function. Here, the function is stored in a variable called area. It can be called like any function created within a function declaration. In a function expression, the function is not processed until the interpreter gets to the statement. This means that you cannot call this function before the interpreter has discovered it. It also means that any code that appears up to this point could potentially alter what goes inside of the function. This is going to become important as we progress with learning JavaScript, because sometimes you'll want the function to just be declared right away, and sometimes you'll want the function to not actually be discovered until something else is specified in the code. This way of writing a function is used in several different situations. Often functions are used to ensure that the variable names do not conflict with each other, especially if the page uses more than one script. Immediately invoked function expressions, also referred to as ifs. These are functions that are not given a name. Instead, they are executed once as the interpreter comes across them. Here we have a variable called area. This holds the value returned from the function, rather than storing the function itself so that it can be called later. In this example, the final parentheses, shown with a yellow background after the closing curly brace of the code block, tell the interpreter to call the function immediately. The grouping operators, which are shown with the blue background, are parentheses there to ensure the interpreter treats this as an expression. It's commonly considered best practice to place the final parentheses before the closing grouping operator, as shown here. You will see many ways in which anonymous function expressions and ifs are used throughout this course. They are used for code that only needs to run once within a task, rather than repeatedly being called by other parts of the script. For example, you could use this code as an argument when a function is called to calculate a value for that function. You could also assign the value of a property to an object, or in event handlers and listeners to perform a task when the event occurs, or to prevent conflicts between two scripts that might use the same variable names. We'll be looking at this shortly. Ifs are commonly used as a wrapper around a set of code. Any variables declared within that anonymous function are effectively protected from variables in other scripts that might have the same name. This is due to the concept called scope, which we will discuss in the next lesson. It is also a very popular technique which is used within jQuery. We'll be learning about this later in the course as well.